North Creek Church in Walnut, California. This was an eye-opening experience for us because we went in there with a rather simple design in response to a tight budget. And the community fathers, the people that form the planning commissions and the architectural review committees, which are a fact of life in most communities today, raised their hand and said, not by the hair on our chinny chin chins. You guys need to spend about $50 or $100 a square foot more, because that's what churches go for in our communities. And the church was devastated because it meant that responding to those city planning boards meant that they were going to lose spaces that were crucial to the ministries of their church. And so we started looking at how do we take that simple form and respond to the outside needs of a community, which is, again, a fact of life today. And that was the response. The Lutheran Church of St. Andrew, which we saw just a few minutes ago, this is a group in Silver Springs, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. The building was actually designed by a guy that I studied in graduate school in 1978, a very famous architect in the Washington, D.C. area. But again, he had been through that process 7 times over the course of a year and a half. The best that he could come up with was $4 million over budget on a project that they had limited amounts of time to get into because they were looking at, they had sold their building and they had a lease on their building that was going to run out. So what they said to us was that we need to make sure that we go into this project and respond to a strong need that we have for good worship space, but the rest of the spaces we can think through intelligently. So out of the 58,000 square feet that they built, 8,000 square feet we spent a little bit of time and effort on, and the rest we economized. Northwind's a group in Orlando, Florida. We went in here to a church market that was building for $180 a square foot and brought $6.5 million savings, largely through an analysis of the building systems. We found that the mechanical systems and the electrical systems were far beyond. This was another building designed by another architect, and we ended up having to change a lot of that because the systems were out of control in a building that was dominated by systems. So theatrical systems, mechanical systems, electrical systems, and structural systems were altered for this building to bring that kind of savings in. This whole notion of integration, getting the people together. Somebody wrote me a note the other day and said, can you tell us what who your contacts are for fundraising besides Forward in Faith? And I said, well, about 40% of our projects are with Forward in Faith. A lot of churches that we work with are denominationally minded, like the Lutheran groups, and they have their own fundraising in-house groups. And then about 20% or so are churches that just go out and hire a separate fundraising consultant. Frankly, I don't have a relationship with them because they never call us. They tell us, send us your information, and we'll call you if we need you. And we never hear from them. But we find it to be crucially important for the architect and the fundraiser to be in communication with one another. Your challenges are not finding an architect and a contractor to build the building. You're going to find people out there like us and others who can go out and get those buildings built that may or may not meet the budgets, but they can get it done. The problem is always going to be, how do you intelligently and in a stewardship way raise the money that you need for these projects? And if the people that are designing the project are not thinking through and talking about how this whole idea is explored and portrayed and explained to a group of people, the project suffers a greater chance of not succeeding. We need to get through this process together. And so our second phase in design is not design development, which is normally when the engineers get involved. We've already done that in first phase. Our second phase is making sure that fundraising comes off right. So we go through a training program with you, and we work with Forward in Faith during that time to make sure that the project is happening in accordance with some of the projected financial visions that were established early on in the process. Our whole notion of building on linkages is hugely important for us. We talk about relationship building all the time in our process. And frankly, in the old way of doing things, relationship was a secondary thought to us. But we have depended on people in local communities who can help us understand what the local community is all about and where the savings are to be found and where the gifts, frankly, are to be found. We find people in many areas that are able to contribute towards a project or bring value to a project in some crucial areas, things like earthwork. Churches almost always have people affiliated with a project that have people who can run a backhoe or run an earth mover. In fact, I was on a project, my own church the other day. We decided to tear the whole front steps out of the building the other day, And the earthwork guy happens to go to church, and he taught me how to run his Caterpillar, which is like twice the size of my car. And I was out there doing that as a gift in kind. Those are the kinds of things that we can offer, not to architects that don't know what they're doing with Caterpillars, but we want to make sure that we find those local resources that are good, solid experts in their own particular realm and find out how we get them involved in the project. I mentioned earlier that the architect must be humble and check his ego at the door. That is something that, frankly, my partner Dan has taught me to do. As an architect, I was told, you're the head guy here. Everybody has to revolve around in your world, and I have had to set that aside and understand that the architect is not the end goal here. The end goal is the ministries of the church, and we want to make sure we understand that. We've talked a little bit about this whole notion of the supply. The supply group is not a group that's out there looking for cheap products either. We want to think about these projects in terms of three areas of potential stewardship savings. Certainly on the initial cost of the building, we've got to think hard about that because that's going to be our first and biggest challenge. But our second two challenges that sometimes sideswipe a church or a school is the notion of energy costs for that building and maintenance costs for that building. And we found that with certain materials, we can bring value over the life of that building. And so we need to think about the 25-year life of a building. Even if those materials get changed out during that time, we want to make sure we think intelligently about that. So we think about life cycle cost.